Thassa, welcome to a journey through time. Hello, dear friends. Today I'll take you to Imperial Brazil of 1876, to the Paraíba Valley of São Paulo, where the aroma of coffee mingled with tears of nostalgia, and where a brave woman would discover that love can flourish even in the most arid soils of despair. This is the story of Francisca, a widow who dared to invade not only an abandoned property, but also the heart of a lonely colonel. A narrative about faith, dignity, and the transforming power of true love. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? What city? What country? I love knowing where our listeners are scattered throughout the Americas and the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave that special like. It helps me so much to continue bringing these soul-warming stories. Taos year 1876, Paraíba Valley, São Paulo, Imperial Brazil. Bistu. The invader and the colonel. The brook murmured ancient secrets among the moss-covered stones, and Francisca Santos raised her moist eyes to the clouded March sky. Her hands, calloused by work and mourning, firmly held the small hands of José and Ana, 6-year-old twins who looked at the world with the same silent bewilderment as their mother. For 3 days they had slept in the open, protected only by a thick cotton blanket that Manuel had brought from the war, the same blanket that had wrapped him in his final deliriums of tuberculosis when he whispered promises to Our Lady of Aparecida between coughs that seemed to tear pieces from his soul. Francisca had turned 30 the week they buried her husband, and felt as if each of those years now weighed upon her thin shoulders. The winter of 1875 had been merciless, not only the cold that froze bones, but the disease that had consumed their savings like fire through dry straw. Grandmother's gold chain, an inheritance she had kept as a sacred relic, was sold for 2,000 reis to pay for a doctor who came from the capital. The ivory saints, the only ornaments of her humble home, became coins that barely lasted a fortnight on medicines and syrups. When Manuel closed his eyes for the last time, on the morning of March 15th, the only thing left to Francisca was the promise he had murmured, "Our Lady will protect you." The owner of the house where they rented a back room granted a week of mourning. Then, with the coldness of one who counts coins, he demanded they leave. Francisca packed the children's few clothes, the rosary of blue beads that had been her mother's, and the small image of Our Lady of Aparecida that Manuel had brought from Aparecida do Norte before their marriage. There was nowhere to go. Manuel's relatives had died in the war, her own lived far away in the backlands of Minas, too poor to help. The nearest town was 2 leagues distant, and Francisca knew that a woman alone with 2 children would be viewed with suspicion or worse. It was then she remembered the abandoned cottage. She had passed it several times, when going to the village to sell eggs from her hens, before poverty forced her to sell them too. It was a small construction of mud walls and red tiles, situated on the borders of São Bento plantation. They told her it belonged to the colonel, but had been empty for years, since the family of tenants who lived there had left for São Paulo. Colonel Antonio Almeida Vasconcelos. Francisca knew his name as everyone in the region knew it. A man of possessions, young widower, owner of one of the largest coffee plantations in the Paraíba Valley. They said he was fair with workers, but stern with trespassers. Trespassers. The word echoed in Francisca's mind as she walked down the dusty path, a child in each hand. That's what she would become, a trespasser. But Our Lady would understand. A mother would do anything to protect her children, even if it meant staining her honor. The rain began to fall when they spotted the cottage. Light at first, then torrential, as if the sky were pouring all the sadness accumulated in those months of suffering upon the earth. José and Ana ran to take shelter under the rotting wooden porch, while Francisca tried the door. It wasn't locked. The hinge groaned, a sound that seemed to come from far away, from a time when that house had known laughter and conversations by the hearth. Inside, the air smelled of mold and abandonment, but there was an iron stove, a rough table, 2 straw chairs. Francisca knelt right there on the packed earth floor and took the image of Our Lady from her bosom. She placed it on the table, lit a candle she carried in her bundle, and made her prayer. "My Lady who always protected the helpless, here we are. It is not theft when one has nowhere to go. It is not sin when one seeks to protect those you entrusted to our care. Grant us a roof, even if borrowed, until we find our way." José and Ana approached, curious and frightened. Ana gently touched her mother's arm. "Mama, are we going to live here?" Francisca looked around. Dust, cobwebs, windows without glass. But there was a roof, walls that would protect from rain and cold. There was hope. "For now, my daughter, Our Lady will show us what to do." And so, on an afternoon in March 1876, Francisca Santos became a trespasser. But there was something in her heart that told her Our Lady of Aparecida had prepared something greater than she could imagine, something that would begin with an invasion and become, but that was a story only time would reveal. 4 weeks passed like leaves carried by the wind. Francisca would wake before dawn, when the world still slept under the silvery mantle of dew, and walk to the brook with her bundle of dirty clothes. There, kneeling on the slippery stones, she scrubbed the few pieces they possessed while murmuring prayers. The work of her hands had become a meditation. Each movement of soap over fabric was a silent plea, each rinse in the flowing waters, a renewal of faith. Jose and Ana always accompanied her, gathering ripe jabuticabas and red pitangas that grew wild in the vicinity. The cottage had been transformed little by little into an improvised home. Francisca had swept every corner, washed the walls with salt water, mended the cracks in the windows with pieces of cloth. On the rough table, the image of Our Lady of Aparecida reigned serene, always surrounded by wildflowers that Ana gathered with childish devotion. Every night, after their frugal supper of fruits and roots, Francisca led the children in praying the rosary, their voices intertwined in the golden penumbra of candlelight, creating sacred music that seemed to rise to the blackened beams of the ceiling. Holy Mary, Mother of God. The beads slid between her fingers like drops of hope. Jose, quieter than his sister, rested his head on his mother's shoulder during prayers. Ana, lively as a little bird, sometimes forgot the prayer to watch the dancing shadows on the wall. Francisca lived in constant alarm, fearing the day when some worker from the plantation would discover her presence. She would hide when she heard distant voices, did everything possible not to leave signs of her occupation. But there were moments, especially when the afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of the nearby coffee groves, when she allowed herself to dream. She dreamed of a simple but dignified life, honest work, a home of her own, the children studying their first letters. She dreamed, above all, that Manuel was somehow present, blessing those difficult days with his loving memory. In the 3rd week, Ana fell ill with fever. Francisca spent 2 sleepless nights, applying wet cloths to the girl's forehead and praying with desperate fervor. It was when she understood she couldn't continue hiding indefinitely. She needed help, medicines, resources she didn't have, but Our Lady of Aparecida, in her infinite mercy, seemed to have other plans. In the early morning of the 28th day, when Francisca kept watch over the children's restless sleep, she heard the trot of horses approaching. Her heart raced. She rose silently, extinguished the candle, peered through the crack in the window. 5 men on horseback were coming down the path that led to the cottage. Even in the pre-dawn gloom, she could distinguish the proud posture of the one riding in front. Well-tended clothing, broad-brimmed hat, bearing of one accustomed to command. The colonel, there was no doubt. Francisca felt her legs weaken. The moment she had so feared had arrived. She would be expelled, perhaps even arrested for trespassing. And the children? What would become of the children? Jose woke at the sound of hooves on the earth. Ana continued sleeping. Her fever had finally broken during the night. Francisca signaled for the boy to remain quiet and walked to the door. She opened it slowly, stepped onto the porch. The fresh morning air caressed her face, bringing the perfume of coffee flowers that were beginning to bloom. It was April, month of renewal, of hopes that sprout after winter. Colonel Antonio Almeida Vasconcelos stopped his horse a few meters from the house. He was younger than Francisca had imagined, perhaps 35 years, dark hair slightly grey at the temples, eyes that seemed to have known much sadness. There was no anger in his expression, only curiosity and something resembling perplexity. Francisca raised her chin, gathered all the dignity she possessed and waited. If she was to be expelled, she would face this moment with the same faith that had brought her here. Our Lady would not abandon her now. The colonel dismounted, handed the reins to one of the men and walked toward the porch. His steps were firm but not threatening. When he stopped before her, Francisca could see his face better. Features marked by sun and responsibility, but eyes that held gentleness. "Madam," he said, and his voice was deep, melodious. "It seems we have a delicate situation here." Francisca lowered her eyes, hands clasped over her simple apron. When she spoke, her voice came out thin but clear and firm. "Yes, Colonel, and I know I have no excuse for what I did. It was the beginning of a conversation that would change the destiny of them all. But they didn't know that yet." The silence that followed Francisca's words seemed to extend like an invisible bridge between two worlds. Hers, made of dispossession and faith. His, woven from responsibilities and solitude. Antonio Almeida Vasconcelos studied this woman with eyes that had learned to read people through years of commanding men and business. He saw first what any observer would notice: chestnut hair pulled back in a simple bun, cotton dress carefully mended, bare feet on the worn porch boards. But his eyes, trained by experience and softened by his own pain, saw beyond appearances. There was dignity in that erect posture, courage in how she faced his presence without hiding. There was something more, a serenity that only comes from deep faith, an inner light that outer poverty had not managed to extinguish. Behind him, Antonio heard the contained impatience of the men who accompanied him. Joaquim Ferreira, the overseer, awaited clear orders. Expel the trespassers. Perhaps call the sheriff. That's how this type of situation was resolved. It's what society expected from a respected colonel. But something in the air of that morning, perhaps the perfume of coffee flowers mixed with the aroma of hope that emanated from this woman, made Antonio hesitate. "What is your name, madam?" "Francisca Santos, sir. But everyone knows me as Chiquinha." "And those children?" Jose appeared in the doorway, hair disheveled from sleep, large eyes fixed on the imposing man speaking with his mother. Ana continued sleeping. "My children, sir, Jose and Ana." "Twins!" Francisca placed a protective hand on the boy's head. Fatherless for little more than a month, Antonio felt something tighten in his chest. Orphans, as he had become an orphan of his wife, orphan of the children he never had. Another's pain echoed in his own, creating an unexpected resonance. "And what brought you to my property, Donna Chiquinha?" It was the first time anyone had called her Donna since Manuel's death. The respectful treatment brought tears to Francisca's eyes, which she contained with effort. "Necessity, Colonel. And perhaps the hand of Our Lady of Aparecida." "Our Lady?" "My husband Manuel, may God rest his soul, made a promise before dying. He said Our Lady would protect us." Francisca breathed deeply, choosing each word carefully. "It's no excuse for what I did, but when one has no shelter, when children need a roof, a mother does what she must do." Antonio walked a few steps, hands crossed behind his back. From where he stood, he could see the simple interior of the cottage through the half-open door. The image of Our Lady on the table, the improvised bed where Anna slept, everything arranged with care despite extreme poverty. This house had been empty for 4 years. 4 years since the family of tenants who occupied it had left. Antonio had always thought of tearing it down, using the salvageable wood for other purposes. But something always made him postpone that decision. Now he understood why. "Where did your husband work?" "He was a farmer, sir. Before the war he had his own small farm. After he returned sick." Francisca didn't finish the sentence, but the silence said everything. "The Paraguayan War?" "Yes, sir. 5 years away. Returned with bad lungs." "The disease that took him?" Antonio nodded slowly. He knew well the ravages of that war. So many men had left young and strong, returning broken in body or soul. His own brother, Carlos, still bore marks from those terrible years. He turned to Joaquim Ferreira, who awaited instructions with visible irritation. "Joaquim, take the men back. I'll catch up with you later." "But boss, what about the trespassers?" "I'll handle this personally." The overseer hesitated but didn't dare question. He mounted his horse, signaled to the other men, and they departed, leaving a cloud of red dust in the air. When the sound of hooves faded, Antonio approached Francisca again. Ana had awakened and appeared in the doorway, still sleepy, clinging to her mother's skirt. "Donna Chiquinha," he said, and there was a softness in his voice he didn't expect to hear from himself. "This house has been abandoned for years. If you take good care of it, keep everything clean and in order." Francisca raised her eyes, hopeful but still wary. "You could work for me, in the big house as a housekeeper, in exchange for fair wages, housing, food for the children." Antonio paused. "And protection of the law." The world seemed to stop around Francisca. It was more than she had dared to dream, more than she had judged possible. Dignified work, protection for the children, a future where Our Lady of Aparecida had shown her infinite mercy. "Colonel, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. You need to accept." Francisca knelt right there on the porch floor and kissed Antonio's gloved hand. He helped her rise, moved by that demonstration of sincere gratitude. "One thing, Donna Chiquinha. In the big house lives Donna Caterina, the cook. She's a woman of much experience. She'll teach you about the house's routine. And the children, they can learn their first letters with the chapel priest. God repay you, Colonel. God repay you double. When Antonio mounted his horse and rode away, Francisca was still on the porch, the children one on each side, watching the elegant figure disappear among the coffee groves. There was something in that encounter that went beyond Christian charity, something that neither she nor he yet fully understood, but Our Lady of Aparecida knew and smiled. The big house of Sao Bento plantation rose like a dream of lime and stone amid the infinite green of the coffee groves. Francisca stopped at the entrance courtyard, the children walking timidly at her side, and felt her heart quicken. Tall windows protected by wooden shutters, vast porch supported by white columns, garden where roses and dahlias bloomed in colorful profusion. Donna Caterina appeared at the back door before Francisca decided to knock. She was a woman of 65, dark skin that spoke of African origins, grey hair gathered under an impeccable white headscarf. Her eyes, alert and gentle, evaluated the newcomer with the wisdom of one who had seen many changes in that house. "So you're the chiquinha the master brought here," she said, but there was warmth in her voice. "I'm Caterina. I was born on this plantation, saw 3 generations of the Vasconcellos grow up, and you'll be welcome." Francisca felt deep relief. She had feared finding resistance, jealousy, the natural distrust of one who sees someone from outside arrive. Instead, she found the open arms of a woman who understood the turns of destiny. "Bring those children inside," Caterina continued. "They must be hungry, and I have fresh cornbread coming out of the oven." The kitchen of the big house was a realm of copper and iron, enormous pots, wood-burning stove that exhaled welcoming warmth. José and Ana sat at the large table, eyes wide at the generous slices of still warm bread, the foamy milk served in china cups. While the children ate, Caterina showed Francisca the rooms that would be under her responsibility. The dining room with jacaranda table for 12 people. The main parlor with grand piano that no one had played since the death of Senora Beatriz Clara. The guest rooms always ready for visitors who arrived without warning. "Senor Antonio is a man of few words," Caterina explained, as they walked through the wide corridors. "Since he lost his wife, he's been rather closed in on himself, but he has a good heart, I can guarantee that." Francisca absorbed every detail, the embroidered linen curtains, the oratories with ivory saints, the family portraits where smiles from the past seemed to observe the present with melancholy benevolence. Everything spoke of a previous life, of interrupted happiness, of mourning that had not yet completely healed. "And the lady, the colonel's wife?" Caterina stopped before a portrait. A young woman, blonde hair, clear eyes full of life, blue silk dress, pearl necklace, smile that radiated contentment. Donna Beatriz Clara. She died of yellow fever in 1872, along with the baby she was expecting. Senor Antonio nearly went mad with grief. Since then he doesn't speak of marriage, doesn't receive unmarried young ladies, lives only for the plantation and business. Francisca contemplated the portrait in silence. There was something in that woman's expression that spoke to her heart, perhaps the same simple faith she herself carried, perhaps the promise of true love that death had prematurely interrupted. Was she very religious? Our Lady of the Conception was her devotion. She prayed the rosary every day in the chapel, always with a bouquet of fresh flowers for the altar. Caterina smiled with nostalgia. The master ordered the chapel enlarged after she died. He said it was a promise he had made, for her to return in good health from Rio de Janeiro, where she went to try to get well. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Antonio himself. Francisca heard his firm steps in the corridor, the soft jingling of spurs against the board floor. When he appeared in the parlor doorway, still wearing riding boots and dusty hat, she felt again that strange acceleration of the heart. "How are you adapting?" he asked, addressing Francisca but smiling at José and Ana, who had run to hide behind their mother's skirts. "Very well, Colonel. Donna Caterina has been very kind." Antonio nodded, satisfied. There was something different in the atmosphere of the house since that family had arrived. A new energy, a sensation of life he hadn't felt in a long time. The children's voices echoing through the corridors, the evident care with which Francisca arranged each object, as if she understood the sentimental value of each piece. "The children will begin lessons next Monday. Father Bento comes twice a week to teach first letters to the workers' children. José and Ana will join the group." "God repay you, sir." There was gratitude in her voice, but also something more. Antonio was surprised to notice how the evening light, filtering through the tall windows, gilded Francisca's chestnut hair, how her eyes seemed to hold serene depths that invited him to dive in. He pushed those thoughts away quickly. He was a widower for a short time, she was too. It wasn't appropriate, it wasn't sensible, but there was something about this woman. Donna Chiquinha, he said, his voice softer than intended. If you need anything at all, just seek me out. When Antonio left, Caterina observed Francisca with perceptive eyes. She had seen many things in her 65 years, knew the signs when two solitary souls began to recognize each other. Come, she said, leading Francisca back to the kitchen. I'll teach you to make coffee the way the master likes it, and while we do that, I can tell some stories of this house. Outside, the coffee groves undulated under the warm May breeze. April had passed quickly, bringing adaptation, new routine, hopes that sprouted like flowers after rain. May arrived loaded with promises that neither Francisca nor Antonio dared to name, but there was already something in the air, something that made the birds sing with more joy, the flowers bloom with more vigor, something that Our Lady of Aparecida, in her infinite wisdom, wove into the threads of destiny with invisible and loving hands. Time would tell what it would be. For now it was enough to have the peace of a house that had returned to life, of hearts that were beginning to heal, of children laughing through corridors where before only silence echoed. June arrived with its cold nights and starry sky, bringing with it the tradition of St. John's bonfires. In the big house of São Bento plantation, for the first time in 4 years, preparations for the June festival stirred the peaceful routine. Francisca coordinated, under Caterina's experienced guidance, the decoration of the main parlor, with colorful pennants and crepe paper flowers. José and Ana ran around the porch, helping to carry chairs to the yard, where the bonfire would be lit. Father Bento, a 28-year-old Franciscan who served the region, chatted animatedly with Antonio about the novena sermons. "It's good to see this house with life again," the priest commented, observing the movement. Donna Beatriz Clara would be happy to know the traditions continue. Antonio nodded, but his eyes discreetly followed Francisca's figure as she went up and down the stairs, carrying trays of homemade sweets. For 2 months, she had worked in the big house, and her presence had transformed not only the rooms, always impeccable, perfumed with lavender, but something deeper in the atmosphere of the place. It was the music she hummed softly while working, the prayers she murmured while arranging fresh flowers in the oratories, the affectionate way she treated each object, each piece of furniture, as if she understood they hold stories and deserve respect. Joaquim Ferreira, the overseer, watched everything with growing irritation. Since Francisca's arrival, he felt his influence over the boss diminish. Antonio consulted her about small domestic decisions, praised her initiatives, smiled in a way he hadn't smiled in years. On the afternoon of June 23rd, St. John's Eve, Joaquim found an opportunity to act. Francisca was alone in the chapel, arranging flowers on the altar for the evening novena, when he appeared in the doorway. "Francisca," he said, his rough voice loaded with insinuation, "you have a way of conquering the men of this house, don't you?" She raised her eyes, surprised. Joaquim was a 40-year-old man, face marked by sun, crude manners that contrasted with the boss's natural elegance. Since she'd arrived, he had addressed her only to give orders, always with professional coldness. "I don't understand what you mean," she replied, continuing to arrange the flowers. "You understand all right." Joaquim approached, blocking the chapel exit. "Pretty woman, needy widow, lonely boss, it's the oldest story in the world." Francisca straightened, her face reddening with indignation. "You're forgetting who you're talking to. I'm an honest woman. I work here out of necessity, not for—" "Why not?" Joaquim smiled unpleasantly. "The colonel might not notice your game, but I do, and if you're smart, you'll realize there are other men here who can offer you protection." The insinuation was clear and repugnant. Francisca felt her blood boil but maintained her dignity. "Leave this chapel immediately. This is a sacred place. I don't permit indecent conversations here." "And what if I don't want to leave?" Joaquim stepped forward. "Who's going to make me? You?" It was then that Antonio's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade. "I will make you." Joaquim spun on his heels, his face paling when he saw the boss in the chapel doorway. Antonio wasn't shouting, but there was something icy in his expression that was more terrifying than any shout. "Colonel, I was just—" "You were leaving." Antonio entered the chapel, positioning himself between Joaquim and Francisca. "And you're not coming back. Stop by the office tomorrow, collect your pay, and leave the plantation." "But boss—" "I'm no longer your boss." Antonio's voice remained low, controlled, but there was iron in it. And if you're still on my lands when the sun rises, I'll call the sheriff. Joachim hesitated, measured his forces, understood he had lost. He left the chapel without another word, leaving behind only the tension that slowly dissipated. Francisca stood by the altar, hands trembling slightly. Antonio approached her, noting her pallor, the way she struggled to maintain composure. "Did he offend you?" "It was nothing a woman doesn't know how to handle," she replied, but her voice faltered slightly. Antonio felt a wave of protection, cold anger against any man who dared disrespect this woman. Without thinking much about what he was doing, he extended his hand and gently touched her arm. "Francisca?" It was the first time he had pronounced only her name, without the formal donna, the first time he allowed the implied intimacy of those 2 months to manifest in words. She raised her eyes, met his. There was something new there, something that went beyond employee gratitude and employer benevolence. Something that both had felt growing in silence, nurtured by daily coexistence, by discreet smiles, by apparently casual conversations about the children, the plantation, faith. "Sir, Antonio," he said softly. "My name is Antonio." The moment prolonged, loaded with unspoken possibilities. Outside they could hear the festival preparations, the cheerful voices of workers decorating the yard. But in there, in the golden penumbra of the chapel, only 2 hearts that were beginning to recognize each other. Francisca lowered her eyes first, not yet ready to name what she felt. Antonio stepped back, understanding that there was a time for everything, that some flowers only bloom when their season truly arrives. "The novena will begin soon," she said, her voice firmer. "Yes, and tomorrow we'll have a new overseer. Giuseppe Benedetti, an Italian who understands coffee and respect." When they left the chapel together, the setting sun tinted their silhouettes gold. In the kitchen, Caterina smiled to herself while stirring hot punch at the stove. She had sensed this from the first day. Our Lady of the Conception and Our Lady of Aparecida certainly were weaving together a destiny that transcended human understanding. The St. John's Festival would be the beginning of something new. But neither Francisca nor Antonio imagined how much. The St. John's bonfire crackled in the plantation yard, its dancing flames spreading golden light over the cheerful faces of workers, families, and neighbors celebrating the tradition. Francisca circulated among the guests serving hot punch and hominy. Ana and Jose played in circles with other children, and the music of old Benedito's accordion filled the night with melodies that spoke of ancient loves and future promises. Antonio watched everything from a corner of the porch, half hidden in the shadows. It had been years since he truly participated in a festival. Since Beatriz Clara's death, he limited himself to fulfilling social obligations, appearing, conversing as necessary, retiring early. But that night there was something different in the air, something that kept him there, watching. It was Francisca who attracted his attention. The graceful way she moved among the guests, always attentive to others' needs, smiling with sincerity to acquaintances and strangers alike. She wore the navy blue dress that had been Beatriz Clara's. Caterina had suggested it be put to use, since it had been hanging in the wardrobe for 4 years, but the dress had gained new life on Francisca. Adjusted by her own skillful hands with needle and thread, it enhanced her silhouette without ostentation, matched her brown eyes like honey at day's end. There was in her a discreet, natural beauty that dispensed with ornaments to make itself noticed. Giuseppe Benedetti, the new Italian overseer, approached Antonio. "Bella festa, Signor Colonel," he said in his Portuguese still marked by the Tuscan accent. "It's been a long time since I've seen such a joyful celebration." "It's thanks to Donna Francisca," Antonio replied. "She organized everything." Giuseppe followed the boss's gaze, noting how he accompanied the housekeeper's every movement. "Brava, Donna," he commented diplomatically. "I bambini are happy. La casa is always beautiful. È una benedizione, non è vero?" A blessing. That was exactly what Francisca represented for that house, for that plantation, for himself. Antonio was surprised by the sudden clarity of that thought. The festival continued until the early hours. When the last guest said farewell and the bonfire was reduced to embers that flickered like fallen stars, Francisca began collecting empty trays. Antonio approached to help her. "Leave that for tomorrow," he said. "Caterina and the other women can take care of the cleaning." "I can't sleep leaving work half done," Francisca replied, carefully stacking plates. "My mother always said an untidy house means an untidy soul." Antonio smiled. There was something comforting in those small domestic obsessions, in that need for order that had transformed his house into a truly livable place. They worked in silence, side by side, gathering remnants of the festival. When everything was arranged, they walked together to the chapel for a prayer of thanksgiving. It was Francisca's tradition to end special days with a visit to the Blessed Sacrament. The small chapel, illuminated only by 2 candles before the altar, offered an atmosphere of intimate recollection. Francisca knelt in the front pew. Antonio took his place beside her. They prayed the rosary in low voices, their voices intertwining in the repetition of familiar Hail Marys. When they finished, they remained there for a few moments in silent contemplation. It was then that Antonio heard himself speaking. Beatrice Clara loved St. John's festivals. Francisca turned to him surprised. It was the first time he had mentioned his deceased wife in conversation with her. She organized everything personally. She would spend weeks choosing the music, planning the sweets, decorating. Antonio smiled with melancholy. She said St. John was a time of renewal, of special requests to the saints. And what did she ask for? Children. The word came out in a whisper. She always asked for children. She believed Our Lady of the Conception would give her what she so desired. Francisca felt her heart tighten. She understood in that moment the dimension of the loss he carried, not only a beloved wife, but all the dreams that died with her. I'm certain she's happy seeing this house full of life again, she said softly. Seeing Jose and Ana running through the corridors, hearing laughter where before there was only silence. Antonio turned to her. The candlelight created soft shadows on her face, highlighting the sincerity in her eyes. Francisca, he murmured, and there was something new in his voice. You brought life back to this house. You brought life back to me. She was about to protest, to say she was only doing her duties, but he continued. It's not just the work, it's your presence, the way you sing while working, how you arrange flowers in the oratories, how you pray with the children every night. Antonio hesitated, then continued. The way you make me remember it's possible to be happy again. The silence that followed was different from the others, loaded with mutual recognition, with feelings that had been growing in secret and now asked to be named. Francisca felt lost between gratitude and something much deeper that she didn't know how to name. Antonio represented security, protection for her and the children, but there was more. The way his eyes lit up when he smiled, how her heart quickened when she heard his steps in the corridor, how she felt complete only in his presence. Senor Antonio, she began, but he gently interrupted. Just Antonio, please. And then, without either of them planning it, without reason intervening, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a chaste, respectful kiss, but loaded with promise. Antonio's lips touched hers for just a moment, but it was enough for both to know that something had irreversibly changed between them. When they separated, Francisca trembled slightly. Antonio held her hands in his. Forgive me if I was hasty, he murmured, but I couldn't continue pretending I don't feel what I feel. And what do you feel? She asked, her voice almost inaudible. That Our Lady of Aparecida answered a prayer I didn't even know I was making. Outside, the distant church bell chimed 3 times in the early morning. It was June 29th, St. Peter's Eve. Time for promises to be fulfilled, for loves that finally find courage to declare themselves. When they left the chapel, they walked in silence to the big house. At the back door, Antonio bid her farewell with a kiss on the forehead, a gesture that sealed an unspoken promise. Francisca climbed to her quarters, with her heart overflowing. Inside, Jose and Ana slept deeply, tired from the festival. She knelt before the image of Our Lady of Aparecida and murmured, My Lady, if this love is your will, bless it. If it is not, give me strength to renounce it. But in the depths of her heart, she knew the answer had already been given. Not in the dawn of that kiss, but much earlier, the day an invader found not only shelter, but the man God had destined to share her life. July dawned with frost that silvered the coffee groves and brought along with the morning cold an elegant carriage on the plantation's main road. Francisca, who was sweeping the big house porch, felt her stomach contract upon recognizing the vehicle's grandeur, gleaming black lacquer, golden coat of arms on the door, pair of horses that spoke of considerable possessions. Society visitors. They always meant complications. Antonio came out to receive the newcomers, and Francisca could identify them even at a distance. A man of military bearing, bushy mustaches, slightly faded top hat that betrayed better times in the past. An elegant lady, dark silk dress, haughty posture that seemed to measure and judge everything around with a sharp gaze. Carlos Almeida Vasconcelos and his wife, Eulalia. Antonio's older brother and the sister-in-law Francisca knew only through Caterina's references, and none of them were particularly favorable. Captain Carlos is a good man, the cook had explained some days before, but Donna Eulalia, she has her nose in the air as if she smells something bad all the time. Daughter of a ruined baron who lost everything gambling, but didn't lose her arrogance. Francisca discreetly withdrew to the kitchen when the carriage stopped in front of the house. Through a crack in the door, she observed the formal greetings, noted how Carlos embraced his brother with genuine affection, how Eulalia merely extended her gloved hand to be kissed. "Caterina," she whispered, "should I prepare the guest rooms?" "By the way, they brought luggage. They're going to stay a while," the cook replied, already moving pots to prepare a more elaborate lunch. "And you, girl, better prepare yourself." Donna Eulalia has a sharp tongue and hawk's eye for what she considers inappropriate. The following hours confirmed Francisca's presentiments. During lunch served in the main dining room, she felt Eulalia's inquisitive gaze following her every movement. Antonio's sister-in-law noticed everything: the respectful but not servile way Francisca behaved, the manner in which Antonio addressed her, the evident care in the table's presentation. "So this is the famous housekeeper who transformed the house," Eulalia commented when Francisca left to fetch more wine. Her voice carried cutting irony. "Very efficient." Carlos, oblivious to feminine subtleties, praised sincerely. "The house is unrecognizable, Antonio. Since we arrived, I notice an organization, a care. It's been a long time since I've seen you looking so well." "Francisca is a blessing," Antonio replied simply, but there was warmth in his voice that didn't escape Eulalia's notice. In the afternoon, while the men discussed business in the study, Eulalia asked Caterina to show her the house. It was a disguised inspection, and both knew it. "That housekeeper, where did she come from?" she asked as they toured the corridors. "She's a widow, madam. Her husband died from the chest disease he brought back from the war. She was left helpless with 2 small children." "I see." Eulalia stopped before Beatriz Clara's portrait. "And my brother-in-law, in his Christian charity, offered her work." There was something in the way she pronounced Christian charity that made Caterina clench her teeth. She knew that tone, that way of turning virtues into vices through insinuation. "Señor Antonio is a good-hearted man," she replied firmly, "and Francisca is an honest, hard-working woman. The children are delightful." "Certainly," Eulalia smiled coldly. 2 children must be quite a lot of work for a single woman." "Widow," Caterina corrected. "Yes, of course." "Widow?" Eulalia walked to the window that faced the back of the house, where Jose and Ana played in the yard under Francisca's supervision. "A woman still young. It's natural she would seek masculine protection." The insinuation was clear and unpleasant. Caterina felt indignation boil, but remained controlled. Francisca seeks only honest work to support her children, nothing more. Naturally, Eulalia moved away from the window. "Well, I'm certain my brother-in-law knows what he's doing. He's always been very charitable with the needy." That first skirmish was just the beginning. During the following days, Eulalia initiated a subtle but persistent campaign to undermine Francisca's position in the house. Apparently innocent comments about the need to maintain appropriate distances between employers and employees, observations about certain women who take advantage of masculine kindness, suggestions that perhaps it would be better to seek a more experienced, more mature housekeeper. Carlos, a Paraguayan war veteran and straightforward man by nature, initially didn't understand his wife's subtleties. But there was something about Francisca that vaguely troubled him, not the woman herself who seemed dignified and hard-working, but the way his brother spoke of her, looked at her. "Antonio," he said in a nighttime conversation on the porch, smoking cigars and drinking cognac, "are you sure it's wise to keep that woman here?" "Why wouldn't it be?" "Well, she's young, pretty, and you've been a man alone for a long time." Carlos made a delicate pause. "People might talk. Let them talk." The response came out drier than Antonio intended. "Francisca is an honest woman who works for her children's subsistence. There's nothing improper in that." "I'm not saying there is. But you yourself, don't you feel that perhaps what?" Carlos hesitated. How to tell his brother that he perceived in him all the signs of a man who was falling in love? How to alert him to the social dangers of a union between a respected colonel and a woman of humble origins? "Just be careful, brother. You have a position to maintain, business that depends on other planters' trust. A hasty decision." Antonio understood perfectly what Carlos wasn't saying. He felt a mixture of irritation and sadness. Irritation at the interference, sadness at understanding that the outside world wouldn't look favorably on what his heart knew to be true and good. But he had made his decision in that St. Peter's dawn, when he kissed Francisca in the chapel. He wouldn't back down now due to social pressure or political convenience. "Thank you for the concern, Carlos," he said coldly, "but I know what I'm doing." While the two brothers conversed, Francisca was in her small room, kneeling before the image of Our Lady of Aparecida. She felt Eulalia's growing hostility, perceived the subtle changes in the workers' behavior, heard whispers that fell silent when she approached. "My lady," she murmured, "if this storm is a test of my faith, give me strength to face it. If it's a sign I should leave, show me the way. But protect my children, whatever your will may be." Outside, the night wind blew through the coffee groves, bringing the aroma of wet earth and the promise of difficult times ahead. July was just beginning, and already announced storms that would test the strength of that nascent love. But Our Lady of Aparecida, in her infinite wisdom, had plans that contrary winds couldn't undo. August brought with it news that would forever change the course of events at São Bento plantation. Francisca discovered her pregnancy on a morning when nausea prevented her from rising early to prepare breakfast. Caterina, always attentive, immediately noticed the signs that an experienced woman recognizes without difficulty. "Girl," she said softly, when she found Francisca pale, sitting on the edge of the bed, "how long since your—" Francisca raised her eyes, understood the question, and felt the world spin around her. She had been so absorbed by the conflicts with Eulalia, by the growing tensions in the house, that she hadn't paid attention to the signals her own body was sending. 6 weeks, she murmured. Maybe 7. Caterina smiled with maternal tenderness. She had attended many births, accompanied many pregnancies, and knew how to recognize the difference between a desired pregnancy and one that brought complications. This one clearly would be of the second type. "And does Señor Antonio know?" Francisca shook her head negatively, tears beginning to well up. It wasn't the baby that afflicted her. On the contrary, she felt deep joy knowing she carried within her a new life, fruit of that love that had grown so naturally between her and Antonio. But the implications— "Donna Eulalia," she began, but couldn't finish the sentence. "Donna Eulalia can go to hell," Caterina said vehemently. "What matters is that you're going to have a child by the man you love, and he loves you too. The rest is talk from people who have nothing better to do." But Francisca knew it wouldn't be so simple. A housekeeper pregnant by the widowed boss, the situation would be a social scandal, a source of gossip that would spread through neighboring plantations like fire through dry straw. She decided to tell Antonio first. She waited for him to return from inspecting the coffee groves at day's end, asked him for a private conversation in the study. When she closed the door behind her, he immediately noticed her pallor, the tension in her gestures. "Francisca, what happened? Did Eulalia say something?" "It's not about Donna Eulalia." She breathed deeply, gathered courage. "Antonio, I'm expecting a baby." The silence that followed seemed eternal. Antonio looked at her without immediately understanding. Then comprehension came like a wave that sweeps everything before it. Joy, terror, responsibility, protection, everything mixed in his chest in an explosion of emotions. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the words. "Our baby." "Yes." Francisca awaited his reaction, prepared for anything. Rejection, anger, denial. Instead, Antonio approached her slowly, as if fearing she might break at the slightest abrupt movement. He took her hands in his, kissed them with reverence. "Francisca," he murmured, his voice choked, "you can't imagine. For so long I've dreamed of a child. Since I lost Beatriz Clara and the baby." She began to cry then, not from sadness, but from profound relief. She had feared he would see the pregnancy as an unwanted complication, an obstacle to his plans. Instead, she found a man who looked at her as if she had just given him the greatest gift in the world. "But people," she began. "To hell with people." Antonio drew her into his arms. "We're going to marry, Francisca. Immediately. Before any little belly appears. Before they have anything to talk about. Marry." Francisca separated to look into his eyes. "Are you sure? A respected colonel, a woman like me, a woman like you, honest, hard-working, who brought life back to this house and light to my heart." Antonio held her face in his hands. "I don't care what others say. I want you as my wife. I want our child. I want the family God is offering us." The decision, once made, needed to be implemented quickly. Antonio sought out Father Bento that same night, explained the situation with Franciscan honesty. The young priest, a progressive man who understood life's complexities better than many older colleagues, agreed to celebrate the wedding as soon as possible. August 15th, he suggested, Feast of Our Lady of the Assumption, an appropriate date for a new beginning. August 15th, Antonio agreed. Exactly 2 weeks remained. News of the imminent wedding exploded in the house like a dynamite bomb. Eulalia received the information with glacial coldness that disguised her inner fury. Carlos attempted to dissuade his brother in one last, desperate conversation. Antonio, for the love of God, think about what you're doing. Your business, your reputation. My reputation will survive, Antonio replied calmly. And as for business, a man who doesn't have the courage to follow his heart hardly has courage for anything important. Giuseppe, the Italian overseer, was the first to congratulate them openly. Bravissimo, signor Colonel. La signora Francisca è una donna meravigliosa. Sarà una famiglia molto felice, Caterina cried with joy, and immediately began preparations for a celebration that, though simple, should be worthy of the occasion. But it was José who asked the question that most touched Francisca's heart. Mama, does this mean Senor Antonio is going to be our real papa? Yes, my love, she replied, hugging the boy. Real papa for you and for the baby who's coming. Anna clapped with delight, then became serious. And can we call him Papa? Antonio, who had heard the conversation from the doorway, approached and knelt before the children. You can call me whatever you want, he said, his voice choked. As long as you let me care for you as a father should care. On the eve of the wedding, Francisca knelt before the image of Our Lady of Aparecida and made her prayer of gratitude. My lady, who always protected the helpless, thank you for this undeserved grace. The love I didn't dare hope for, the family I didn't dare dream of. Help me be worthy of this blessing. August 15th, 1876, dawned clear and fragrant. In the plantation's small chapel, decorated with white flowers and tulle veils, Francisca Santos would become Donna Francisca Almeida Vasconcelos. But that was a story the next dawn would reveal. The bell of São Bento Plantation's chapel rang joyfully on the morning of August 15th, announcing not only the festivities of Our Lady of the Assumption, but the wedding that would transform an invader into the lady of the big house. Francisca awoke before dawn, knelt before the image of Our Lady of Aparecida, and made her final prayer as a single woman. The dress had belonged to Beatriz Clara herself, a choice that might have seemed morbid, but which Antonio had suggested with almost mystical tenderness. She would be happy knowing her clothes serve a new happiness in this house, he had said. Caterina had adjusted the piece with a mother's care, pearl-colored silk, delicate embroidery that spoke of better times, a cut that completely concealed the pregnancy still in its early stages. Anna and José wore their finest clothes, he in a navy blue suit that Giuseppe had ordered made in town, she in a pink dress with white ribbons that had been Caterina's gift. They were nervous and excited, understanding that something very important would happen, something that would change their lives forever. The small chapel, which normally accommodated only the big house family and some privileged workers, was packed. Giuseppe had brought some recently arrived Italian settlers who squeezed into the rough wooden benches alongside old plantation tenants. Caterina occupied a place of honor in the front row, her eyes bright with tears of joy. Carlos and Eulalia were present, he out of genuine affection for his brother, she from social obligation she fulfilled with icy elegance. But there were other significant absences, neighboring planters who received invitations and discreetly declined them, respectable families who preferred not to associate their names with that inappropriate union. Father Bento, the young Franciscan with compassionate eyes, waited before the simple but carefully decorated altar. Francisca had insisted on wildflowers instead of elaborate arrangements. Daisies, everlastings, small red roses that grew wild at the property's edges. When Antonio entered the chapel, wearing his finest black suit and silk tie, there was a murmur of approval among those present. He was nervous, his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his shirt cuffs, but there was serene determination in his face. He had made his decision and would carry it to its final consequences. Francisca entered alone, as befitted a widow without father or brother to give her to the groom. But she wasn't truly alone. José and Anna walked one on each side, carrying the rings on lace pillows that Caterina had embroidered during recent nights. Beatriz Clara's dress had gained new life on Francisca's body. The discreet curves, the naturally elegant posture, the face illuminated by discreet but profound happiness, everything contributed to a beauty that dispensed with ornaments to make itself noticed. She wore only a simple veil that had been her mother's, and the gold chain Antonio had given her as an engagement gift, a delicate piece with a medal of Our Lady of Aparecida. When she reached the altar, Antonio extended his hand to her. The gesture was simple, but loaded with symbolism that all understood. Here was not merely a rich man offering protection to a needy woman. There was true love, mutual recognition, union of souls that had found completeness in each other. Father Bento began the ceremony with traditional words, but his voice carried special warmth when he addressed the couple. Antonio and Francisca, you present yourselves today before God and this community to seal a union that goes beyond social convenience or material necessity. I see here two people who discovered themselves complementary, who found in love the strength to face the world's prejudices. Eulalia twisted her lips in a discreet grimace, but Carlos nodded approvingly. There was something in the way his brother looked at Francisca that convinced him of the sincerity of those feelings. Antonio, the priest continued, do you accept Francisca as your lawful wife? Do you promise to love and respect her in sickness and in health, in wealth and in poverty, all the days of your life? I do. Antonio's voice came out clear, firm, without hesitation. Francisca, do you accept Antonio as your lawful husband? Do you promise to love and respect him in sickness and in health, in wealth and in poverty, all the days of your life? I do. Francisca smiled through the tears that were beginning to well up. The rings were blessed and exchanged. They were simple, yellow gold without ornaments, but had been blessed before the image of Our Lady of Aparecida before the ceremony. When Antonio slipped the ring onto Francisca's finger, he whispered something only she heard. Our Lady fulfilled the promise I didn't even know I was making. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, Father Bento concluded, I declare you husband and wife. What God has joined, let no man put asunder. The kiss that sealed the union was chaste but emotional. When they separated, Francisca saw tears in Antonio's eyes, tears of joy he wasn't ashamed to shed. The celebration was simple but warm. On the big house porch, Caterina served a banquet made with love: roast suckling pig, egg farofa, sweet corn cake, punch perfumed with cinnamon. Giuseppe played accordion. Some workers sang old ballads. Children ran around the yard in contagious joy. When the sun began to set, tinting gold the coffee groves that extended to the horizon, Antonio and Francisca walked together to the chapel for a prayer of thanksgiving. It was tradition in the Vasconcelos family for newlyweds to seal their union with a common promise before the altar. They knelt side by side in the front pew, hands intertwined, and made their promise, Our Lady of the Conception and Our Lady of Aparecida, who protected and blessed our love, we promise to build a family based on faith, charity, and mutual respect. If you grant us healthy children and long life together, we will expand this chapel and make of it a place of pilgrimage for all who seek hope. It was an ambitious promise for a union that had just begun, but there was something in the air of that night, perhaps the warm breeze that brought the perfume of coffee flowers, perhaps the serenity that seemed to envelop that blessed land, that made any dream seem possible. When they returned to the big house, now truly united, they found a surprise. Carlos had prepared a special toast with the finest wine from the plantation's cellar. To my brother, he said, his voice choked, and to the woman who made him smile again. May God bless this union and make it fruitful in love and children. Eulalia participated in the toast with protocol elegance, but there was resignation in her eyes. She had understood that the battle was lost, that this marriage was an accomplished fact she couldn't undo. Later, when the guests withdrew and the house was plunged into nighttime silence, Antonio and Francisca climbed together the stairs leading to the main bedroom. Jose and Ana slept deeply in their small room, tired from the celebration, but happy with the certainty they now had a complete family. At the room's threshold, Antonio carried Francisca in his arms, a traditional gesture that drew a musical laugh from her. When he gently set her down, she looked around with reverence. It was the room that had been Beatriz Clara's, preserved as a sanctuary of memory. But Francisca felt no embarrassment or jealousy, only gratitude for a woman who had loved this man before her and who, in her posthumous generosity, seemed to bless this new happiness. She would be happy, Antonio murmured, following her thoughts. Beatrice Clara always believed that true love never dies. It only transforms and renews itself. On that wedding night, under the protection of Our Lady of the Assumption and the blessings of a dead woman who continued to love, Antonio and Francisca sealed their union not only in bodies, but in souls that recognized themselves as parts of the same whole. August 15, 1876 would be remembered forever at São Bento Plantation as the day love conquered prejudice, faith overcame convention, and two souls found their way home. September arrived with torrential rains that lashed the coffee groves and transformed the roads into impassable, muddy quagmires. Francisca, now Donna Francisca Almeida Vasconcelos, woke every morning with nausea that left her prostrate until almost midday. The pregnancy was advancing, and though not yet visible under carefully chosen dresses, it was beginning to take its toll on her body. Antonio surrounded her with care that bordered on excessive. He had forbidden her to carry any weight, insisted she rest during afternoons, had hired a young woman to help Caterina with the house's heavier work. It was his first experience as husband and expectant father, and the anxiety of one who had lost a pregnant wife made him see dangers where perhaps none existed. "My love," Francisca would say when he insisted she remain in bed until later, "women have been having children for thousands of years. I'm not made of porcelain." But he couldn't control the fears that tormented him, especially during storm nights, when lightning illuminated the room and wind made the big house windows groan. He would embrace Francisca with excessive delicacy, one hand always placed protectively over her still flat belly. Whispering prayers she pretended not to hear. Carlos and Eulalia had departed a week after the wedding, but not before Eulalia spread her poisonous insinuations throughout neighboring plantations. The story she told, an invader who had seduced a vulnerable widower, a hasty marriage to cover an improper pregnancy, spread like fire through dry straw. The consequences arrived on a morning of fine rain. Giuseppe rode to the big house with worrying news. 3 important regional planters had cancelled commercial partnership contracts with São Bento Plantation. They alleged strategic changes, but everyone knew it was retaliation for Antonio's marriage. "Signor Colonel," Giuseppe said, turning his hat in his hands, "there are also rumors that Colonel Baltazar Mendonça is organizing a kind of boycott, convincing other planters not to do business with our plantation." Antonio received the news in his study, Francisca at his side. She was pale, not only from morning sickness, but from the guilt that consumed her. Her deepest fears were materializing. She was harming the man she loved, compromising the business that sustained hundreds of workers. "It's my fault," she murmured when Giuseppe left. "It's the fault of narrow-minded men who confuse tradition with prejudice," Antonio replied, but she could sense the worry in his voice. The situation worsened when letters arrived from São Paulo banks, questioning the plantation's administrative stability. They didn't say it clearly, but insinuated that a man who made hasty decisions in his personal life might not be reliable in business. One afternoon, while rain drummed on the roof, Francisca sought out Caterina in the kitchen. The old cook found her sitting at the table, hands clasped, face marked by a sadness that broke the heart. "Caterina," she said, her voice almost inaudible, "perhaps I should leave." "Leave for where, girl?" "I don't know. But my presence here is harming Antonio, compromising everything he worked for." Francisca began to cry silently. "I can't destroy his life because of my selfishness." Caterina sat beside her, took her hands in hers. "Listen well to what I'm going to tell you, my daughter. I've seen 3 generations of this family be born, grow, die. I saw Senor Antonio as a child, adolescent, man. Never, listen well, never have I seen him as happy as he's been since you arrived here. But the business gets resolved, money that goes, money that comes back. But true love," Caterina made a significant pause, "that isn't found twice in a lifetime." That night, during supper, Antonio noticed Francisca's unusual silence. José and Ana, sensitive to mood changes in the house, were also quieter than usual. "Francisca," he said when they retired to their room, "what's happening? You barely spoke during dinner." She hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Antonio, did we do the right thing? This marriage, perhaps it was hasty." "The consequences—" He interrupted her by taking her in his arms. "Francisca, look at me." He waited for her to raise her eyes. "Do you regret marrying me?" "No," the response came impulsively. "Never." "Then stop thinking about leaving, because that's what you're thinking, isn't it?" She lowered her eyes, confirming his suspicion. "My love," he said softly. "When I found you in that abandoned cottage, I was dead inside. I functioned, took care of business, fulfilled obligations, but I wasn't alive. You brought me back to life, joy, hope. Do you think I'm going to give up all that because of some petty planters? But if we lose the plantation, we're not going to lose the plantation. We have first-quality coffee, loyal workers, fertile land, business adjusts, new partnerships form." Antonio held her face in his hands. "But if I lost you—" He didn't finish the sentence, but she understood. That same night, as if Our Lady of Aparecida wanted to give a sign of encouragement, the rain stopped. Francisca awoke at dawn and walked to the window. The sky was clear, constellated with stars that seemed like diamonds on dark velvet. A gentle breeze brought the perfume of wet earth and flowers blooming after rain. There was something in that perfumed silence that spoke of renewal, of fulfilled promises, of storms that pass, leaving the earth more fertile. She knelt before the image of Our Lady of Aparecida that occupied a place of honor in the room and made her prayer. "My Lady, who always protected the helpless, give me strength to face storms without losing faith. If this love is your will, make it resist all contrary winds, and if it is not, give me wisdom to accept." When she returned to bed, Antonio was awake, watching her with tenderness. "Were you praying?" "Yes." "Asking protection for our family." "Our family," he repeated, savoring the words. "I like how that sounds." And then, with the naturalness of one discovering the small pleasures of conjugal intimacy, they conversed in low voices about future plans, about the baby who would come, about improvements they wanted to make to the plantation. Outside, September prepared its final rains. But inside the big house, under the protection of true love and sincere prayers, a family strengthened itself to face whatever storm destiny might send. The difficulties hadn't ended. Others would come in the following months. But that night of clear stars and renewed hopes marked the moment when Francisca understood her place was there, beside Antonio, facing together whatever might come. Our Lady of Aparecida smiled, weaving in destiny's loom golden threads that no storm could break. December arrived loaded with omens. Summer promised to be harsh, with merciless sun that dried the earth and made the coffee groves seek shade during the hottest hours of the day. Francisca, now 6 months pregnant, felt the baby's weight growing within her as a promise of new life, but also as a source of increasing anxieties. The town doctor, Dr. Macedo, a white-haired man with antiquated methods, came to the plantation bi-weekly to monitor the pregnancy. His visits left Antonio more at ease, but Francisca perceived something in his eyes that worried her, a furrowing of brows when he palpated her belly, a thoughtful that hid more than it revealed. It was on a stifling December afternoon, when heat made air shimmer over the coffee groves, that complications began. Francisca was in the main parlor, supervising Anna while the girl practiced her first letters on a small slate, when she felt a sharp pain pierce her belly. The pain passed quickly, but left behind a strange sensation, as if something wasn't right inside. Francisca instinctively brought her hand to her belly, trying to perceive movements of the baby that lately showed itself less active. "Mama, are you all right?" Anna asked, noticing her mother's worried expression. "I'm fine, my daughter. Continue with your lessons." But when she stood to fetch water from the kitchen, Francisca felt dizzy. The world spun around her, and only Caterina's quick presence prevented her from falling. "Girl, what was that?" "I don't know." "Dizziness." Caterina helped her sit, noticed her excessive pallor, the way her hands trembled slightly. "I'm going to send for Dr. Macedo." "It's not necessary. It must be the heat." But Caterina already knew the signs. She had attended many births, accompanied many pregnancies. She knew when something wasn't right. Dr. Macedo arrived at day's end, examined Francisca with unusual care, asked questions that left Antonio visibly nervous. "Colonel," he said when they left the room, "I need to speak with you privately." In the study with the door closed, the doctor was direct. "The situation isn't good. Your wife shows signs that may indicate serious complications." "What kind of complications?" "The baby doesn't seem to be developing as it should, and there are signs the placenta may be detaching." The doctor made a grave pause. "If that happens, we could lose both mother and child." Antonio felt the world collapse. Beatrice Clara had died like this. Pregnancy complications that doctors couldn't resolve. History was repeating like a cruel curse. What can we do? Absolute rest. No exertion, no worries. And pray, the doctor added with brutal honesty, because what happens now is in God's hands. That night, Antonio told Francisca what the doctor had said. She received the news with serenity that surprised him. "I always knew this pregnancy would be difficult," she said calmly. "From the first day, I felt it would be a test of our faith." "Francisca, don't talk like that. It's not pessimism, my love. It's confidence in Our Lady of Aparecida. She brought us this far, she'll know what to do." But in the days that followed, Francisca's condition visibly worsened. Belly pains became more frequent. There were moments when she could barely get out of bed. Jose and Ana, frightened by the sudden change in the house's routine, clung to her like cubs needing protection. It was Caterina who suggested the solution. "Señor Antonio, there's a woman around here who understands these things better than any city doctor." "What woman?" "Mother Rosa. She's a midwife healer, knows the secrets of herbs and prayers. She's already saved mothers and babies that doctors had given up on." Antonio hesitated. He was a modern man, believed in official medicine, but his experience with doctors in complicated pregnancy cases hadn't been positive. "Where does she live?" "In the old slave quarters across the creek. She's a freed slave from your father's time, about 70 years old. They say she has hands blessed by Our Lady." "Send for her." Mother Rosa arrived the next day. She was a small woman, dark skin marked by years, completely white hair gathered under a colorful headscarf. Her eyes, however, shone with intelligence and kindness that inspired immediate confidence. She examined Francisca with expert hands, palpating the belly with the delicacy of one who knows every secret of the female body. She murmured prayers softly while working, invocations to saints and oryxars that mixed in a syncretic religiosity typical of the region. "This child wants to be born," she said finally, "but he's afraid. He feels the mother's worry, the father's sadness, and doesn't know if he should come into the world." "What can we do?" Antonio asked. "First, much faith. Second, the right herbs to calm the baby and strengthen the mother." Mother Rosa opened a leather bag where she kept her medicines. "And third, a promise to Our Lady, a serious promise from an open heart." That afternoon, Mother Rosa began a treatment that combined folk medicine with rituals Francisca recognized as profoundly spiritual. Teas from herbs gathered at the right moon phase, baths of blessed leaves, prayers that lasted from sunset to dawn. Antonio, initially skeptical, became convinced as he saw the results. Francisca's pains diminished. She could sleep better, seemed to slowly recover color and spirit. "How do you do this?" he asked Mother Rosa one night. "I'm not the one doing it, sir. It's Our Lady's hands working through mine. I just obey what she commands." For a week, Mother Rosa remained in the big house. During the day, she cared for Francisca with maternal dedication. That night, she prayed endless rosaries in the chapel, asking the Virgin Mary's intercession to save mother and child. It was on a December dawn, when summer prepared its greatest heat, that the miracle happened. Francisca awoke feeling something different. Not pain, but a sensation of movement, vigorous life stirring within her. "Antonio," she whispered, touching her husband's arm. "Feel." He placed his hand on her belly and felt clearly. The baby was kicking with strength, moving with vitality it hadn't shown in weeks. "Mother Rosa was right," Francisca murmured with tears in her eyes. "He was afraid, but now he's decided to be born." When Dr. Macedo returned for a routine examination a week later, he couldn't hide his amazement. The baby had resumed normal growth. All signs of complication had disappeared. "I don't understand," he murmured, examining Francisca thoroughly. "There's no medical explanation for this improvement." "Yes, there is," Antonio said firmly. "Our Lady of Aparecida and Mother Rosa's blessed hands." That afternoon, Antonio sought out Mother Rosa in the small cabin where she had temporarily installed herself. "Mother Rosa, I don't know how to thank you for what you did." "You don't need to thank me, sir. But if you want to thank Our Lady, what does she ask?" "A promise I know you'll keep because you're a man of your word." Mother Rosa smiled mysteriously. "When this child is born strong and healthy, you'll give me the freedom I never truly had." Antonio frowned, confused. "But you're already free." "I'm free on paper, sir, but I never had my own house, my own land, guaranteed sustenance. An old woman like me without family always ends up depending on others' charity." Antonio understood immediately. "You want me to give you a house and a piece of land, and a small monthly income, so I can live with dignity until the day Our Lady calls me." It was a fair request, more than fair. It was the least he could do for a woman who had saved his wife and child. "It's done," he said, extending his hand. And more, I'll build a small chapel on the land I give you, so you can pray your rosaries close to home." Mother Rosa kissed his hand with tears in her eyes. "God repay you, sir, and may Our Lady bless this family forever." When December came to its end, Francisca was strong and healthy. The baby moved vigorously, and everyone on the plantation spoke of the miracle Mother Rosa had worked with her prayers and blessed herbs. But the true miracle was yet to come. The baby would be born in September, month of Our Lady of Mercies, and with him would arrive an era of prosperity and happiness that would make São Bento plantation remembered for generations. Our Lady of Aparecida, as always, knew what she was doing. September 1877 arrived with sunny days and cool nights that announced winter's end. Francisca, now 9 months pregnant, moved through the big house with the serene dignity of one carrying within herself a divine promise. Her rounded belly spoke of vigorous life that would soon manifest to the world. Antonio didn't leave the plantation even for urgent business matters. He spent days in his study, but always attentive to calls from Caterina or the other women who cared for Francisca. At night he sat beside her on the porch, one hand always placed on the belly where his son moved like a small acrobat. "He'll be strong," Francisca would say, smiling when a more vigorous elbow made itself felt. "He already wants to know the world." Mother Rosa had returned 2 weeks earlier, bringing with her a young mulatto woman named Benedita, her apprentice in the midwife arts. They installed themselves in a small house Antonio had ordered, built especially for them, close enough to the big house to arrive quickly when needed. Jose and Ana, now 7 years old, anxiously awaited their brother's arrival. They had prepared gifts with their own hands, he a wooden horse carved with Giuseppe's help, she a small blanket woven from colorful scraps under Caterina's supervision. "How will we know when he's going to be born?" Ana had asked some days before. "Our Lady will tell us," Francisca had replied with serene conviction. "Mother Rosa says babies choose their special moments." The special moment came at dawn on September 24th, Feast of Our Lady of Mercies. Francisca awoke with familiar but different pain. Not the sharp pain she had felt during the months of complications, but a constant rhythmic pressure she immediately recognized. "Antonio," she whispered, gently touching her husband's shoulder. "It's time." He awoke instantly with that lucidity that comes in life's crucial moments. "Are you sure?" "I am." Francisca smiled despite the pain that was beginning to increase. "Our son wants to be born on Our Lady of Mercies Day." The big house transformed into an organized beehive. Caterina boiled water and prepared clean cloths. Giuseppe rode to town to fetch Dr. Macedo, though everyone knew Mother Rosa was the one who would truly conduct the birth. Benedita ran to light candles in the chapel and begin prayers that would last until the birth. Jose and Ana were taken to Caterina's room, where they would remain until everything was finished. They were nervous but excited, understanding that something wonderful was about to happen. Mother Rosa arrived with her leather bag and the tranquil smile of one who had already attended hundreds of births. "How is our girl?" she asked, examining Francisca with expert hands. "Strong and ready," Francisca replied between 2 contractions. "The baby is ready too. Then let's receive him as he deserves." The labor was long, but without grave complications. Francisca bore the pains with courage that impressed even Mother Rosa, praying in low voice between contractions, asking Our Lady of Mercy's protection for everything to go well. Antonio remained in the room, against the epoch's customs, but Francisca had insisted on having him near. He held her hand during the strongest contractions, seeking strength in the presence of the man she loved. "It's almost time," Mother Rosa announced when the sun was already high. "A few more contractions and we'll be able to see this boy." It was then that something happened, which everyone interpreted as a divine sign. At the exact moment the baby began to be born, the chapel bell began ringing by itself, movement that had no human explanation, since Benedita was in the room helping with the birth. "Our Lady is announcing the boy's arrival," Mother Rosa whispered with tears in her eyes. With 3 more vigorous contractions, the baby came into the world. He was a big, strong boy, who cried immediately upon contact with air, protesting against abandoning maternal warmth. "Manuel Antonio Almeida Vasconcelos," Francisca announced, when Mother Rosa placed the baby in her arms. As we had agreed, Antonio looked at that red, wrinkled little creature with the expression of one who couldn't believe what he saw. His son, son of his blood, fruit of true love, continuation of his lineage he had thought lost forever. "May I touch him?" he asked, his voice choked. "He's your son," Francisca replied, smiling through tears of joy. You can hold him. When Antonio took the baby in his arms, something completed itself in his heart. All past losses, all accumulated pains, all uncertainties about the future, everything dissolved before the reality of that new life he had helped create. "Thank you," he murmured, not knowing if addressing Francisca, God, or Our Lady of Mercies. "Thank you for this undeserved grace." Jose and Ana were called to meet their brother when everything was arranged and Francisca was already resting comfortably. They approached the bed with reverence, eyes wide at the baby sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. "He's so small," Ana whispered, delicately touching the baby's closed fist. "He'll grow strong like Papa," Jose said with 7-year-old conviction. Papa. The word echoed in Antonio's heart like celestial music. His adoptive children called him that naturally without embarrassment, as if he had always been their father. Dr. Macedo arrived at day's end, examined mother and child, and declared himself satisfied with everything he found. "Perfect birth," he announced. "The baby is healthy, the mother is recovering well. Once again, I must admit, Mother Rosa did excellent work." "Our Lady of Mercies did the work," Mother Rosa corrected modestly. "I just obey her orders." That night, when the big house finally quieted, Antonio and Francisca remained awake, contemplating the son who slept in a carved wooden cradle Giuseppe had prepared as a gift. "Do you think Manuel would approve?" Francisca asked, referring to her first husband. "The baby's name?" "I'm certain he would approve," Antonio replied with conviction. "He made a promise to Our Lady of Aparecida. This child is the fulfillment of that promise." Manuel Antonio awoke to nurse, and Francisca put him to her breast with the naturalness of one who had already gone through this experience. Antonio watched, fascinated by the miracle of life that nourished itself, grew, manifested its basic needs with vigorous crying that echoed through the house. "Our promise," he reminded her softly. "Expand the chapel, make it a place of pilgrimage." "Yes, and it will be fulfilled." Francisca looked at the son who nursed with healthy appetite. "This child is proof that Our Lady keeps her promises. We will keep ours too." Outside, September prepared its final days. Winter was definitively over, and spring arrived laden with promises of renewal. At São Bento Plantation, a new era had begun with Manuel Antonio's birth, an era of prosperity, happiness, and faith that would mark that land forever. Mother Rosa, before retiring to her new house, stopped before the cradle and made a final prayer. "Our Lady of Mercies, bless this child. Make him grow strong, just, and prosperous, and may this family be an example of true love for all generations to come." It was a prayer that would be answered beyond all human expectations. 5 years had passed since Manuel Antonio's birth, and São Bento Plantation prospered as never before. The coffee groves grew green under 1882's generous sun. The big house resonated with the cheerful voices of 3 children, Jose, now 12 years old, Ana, the same age, and Manuel Antonio, like a 5-year-old hurricane running through corridors with childhood's inexhaustible energy. Francisca, at 37, had become the plantation's true mistress. Her transformation had been gradual but complete, from the humble woman who had invaded an abandoned cottage to the respected matriarch who coordinated not only domestic life, but also social projects that benefited the entire region. The chapel had been expanded according to the promise made to Our Lady of Mercies. What had begun as simple construction had transformed into an elegant temple, with marble altar brought from Carrara, colored stained glass that painted the interior with golden light, and an image of Our Lady of Aparecida that attracted pilgrims from distant plantations. Giuseppe, now general overseer, had introduced agricultural techniques that significantly increased coffee productivity. Free workers and ex-slaves coexisted harmoniously, many living in houses Antonio had built especially for their families. But it was on a March morning in 1882 that news arrived that would test the strength of that love built over 6 years. Colonel Baltazar Mendonça, the neighbor who had always viewed Antonio and Francisca's union with suspicion, appeared at the big house with documents he made a point of dramatically exhibiting on the study table. "Antonio," he said, barely containing a malicious smile, "I have here something that might interest you greatly." Antonio examined the papers with growing concern. They were certificates and records Baltazar had ordered, fetched from the capital's registry offices, documents that revealed a truth no one knew. Francisca was not a widow. Manuel Santos, her first husband, was alive. He had deserted from the army during the Paraguayan War's final months, had taken refuge in Rio de Janeiro, under a false name, where he lived as a merchant for over 10 years. The death Francisca had witnessed, the funeral she had attended, all had been a charade to escape military authorities. "Your marriage is invalid," Balthazar declared with evident satisfaction. "Francisca was committing bigamy without knowing it, and the children born from this union—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Manuel Antonio would be considered a bastard son without inheritance rights. José and Ana, children from the first marriage, could be claimed by their biological father. Antonio felt the world collapse around him, not because of the legal issue, that could be resolved with lawyers and time, but because of the pain this revelation would cause Francisca, the way it would destroy the security she had so carefully built. "Why are you telling me this, Balthazar?" "Because we've been neighbors for a long time. Because I have consideration for your traditional family." Balthazar's smile became crueler. "And because I believe a man of your position deserves to know the truth about the woman he lives with." When Balthazar left, Antonio remained alone in the study, documents scattered on the table like evidence of a reality he didn't know how to face. He needed to tell Francisca, but how to tell her that the man she believed dead had faked his own death, how to explain that her entire life for the past 6 years had been built on an involuntary lie. He found her in the garden, teaching Manuel Antonio to care for the rose bushes she had planted, to replace those that died during a frost. It was a scene of domestic tranquility that broke his heart, knowing it would soon be destroyed. "Francisca," he said, and something in his voice made her immediately raise her eyes. "What happened?" He told her everything, every word from the documents, every legal implication, every possible consequence. Francisca listened in silence, her face gradually paling, hands trembling slightly as she held the small gardening spade. When he finished, the silence that followed seemed eternal. Manuel Antonio continued playing with the earth, oblivious to the storm breaking over his family. "So I'm not your wife," she said finally, her voice almost inaudible. "Legally, no. But in heart, before God, legally is what matters." Francisca slowly stood, cleaned earth from her hands with mechanical gestures. "And Manuel Antonio, he's my son. He'll always be my son, no matter what papers say." But Francisca understood the implications better than he did. In a society that valued legitimacy above all, a bastard son would face obstacles throughout life, and she would return to being what she had always been, an invader. That night, after the children slept, they had the most difficult conversation of their lives. "Antonio," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed they had shared for 5 years, "I need to leave. Never. Don't you understand? My presence here compromises you, compromises Manuel Antonio, compromises our entire family." Tears began to well up. "If Manuel appeared claiming his rights, let him appear. We'll resolve this legally. And meanwhile, while the process lasts, the rumors, the judgments—" Francisca shook her head. "I can't do this to you. And I can't live without you." The declaration came out like a cry of pain. Antonio knelt before her, held her hands as if he could physically hold her against any wind that tried to take her away. "Francisca, for 6 years we've been husband and wife, before God, before our conscience, before true love. A paper won't change that, but it will change everything else." They talked until dawn, weighing possibilities, discussing solutions, trying to find a way to preserve what they had built together. But they always ran into the same implacable reality. Society wouldn't forgive. Enemies would take advantage. The children would suffer the consequences. It was Manuel Antonio who, unknowingly, gave them the answer they sought. The next morning he found his parents talking seriously on the porch and approached with 5-year-old natural curiosity. "Why are you sad?" he asked, climbing onto Antonio's lap. "We're not sad, son. We're worried." "About what?" Antonio exchanged glances with Francisca. How to explain to a 5-year-old child that his legitimacy was being questioned? "Sometimes," he said carefully, "people say bad things about our family." Manuel Antonio thought for a moment, then asked with children's disconcerting simplicity, "But we love each other, don't we?" "Yes, son, very much." "Then it doesn't matter what people say." Manuel Antonio kissed his father's face with spontaneity that brought tears to the adult's eyes. True love is stronger than bad words. In that simple phrase, spoken by a child who didn't even fully understand the situation, Antonio and Francisca found the strength to face the approaching storm. "You're right, son," Antonio said, looking directly into Francisca's eyes. "True love is stronger than anything." And so on a March morning in 1882, they decided they wouldn't flee or hide. They would face together the consequences of the truth that had come to light, fight legally for their rights, and prove that true love can overcome any obstacle the world imposes. Our Lady of Aparecida, who had protected them thus far, would certainly protect them in that final trial. Autumn 1883 arrived laden with changes that seemed impossible just a year before. The legal battle Antonio and Francisca faced proved more complex than they imagined, but also brought unexpected revelations that would forever change their family's destiny. Giuseppe, whose loyalty to the Vasconcellos family surpassed any personal interest, had used his contacts among Rio de Janeiro's Italian immigrants to discreetly investigate Manuel Santos's whereabouts. What he discovered surprised everyone. Manuel Santos was not only alive, but had established a new family under false identity. He had married a Portuguese widow, adopted her children, and lived as a prosperous merchant in the Tijuca neighborhood. Most importantly, when he learned his death had been discovered, instead of claiming rights over the children he had abandoned, he offered to sign documents formally renouncing any paternal claims. "I stopped being their father the day I faked my death," he said in a letter Giuseppe personally brought to the plantation. "If they found a true father, may God bless them." The discovery radically transformed the legal situation. With Manuel Santos's formal renunciation, Jose and Ana could be officially adopted by Antonio. The marriage with Francisca, annulled by the discovery of the previous situation, was celebrated again in a ceremony even more moving than the first. This time, the plantation's expanded chapel was packed. Planters who had initially criticized the union now recognized Antonio and Francisca's dignity and moral correctness. Giuseppe served as best man. Mother Rosa, now 78 but still lucid, personally blessed the couple. But the true surprise came when Father Bento, now mature and respected throughout the region, announced during the ceremony, "Rarely have I witnessed love as true as what we see here." This couple faced adversities that would destroy less solid unions, but emerged strengthened by faith and mutual dedication. They are an example for all of us. Jose and Ana, now 16, participated in the ceremony as principal witnesses. Jose was studying law in the capital and had returned especially for his adoptive parents' wedding. Ana, who had become a teacher at the school Francisca had established for workers' children, coordinated all the chapel's floral decoration. Manuel Antonio, now 8 years old, carried the rings on a blue velvet pillow, proud of his role in the ceremony. He had grown as a self-confident boy, protected by the unconditional love of parents who never allowed legal complications to affect his upbringing. But the family hadn't stopped growing. Francisca had given birth to 2 more children in subsequent years. Francisca Maria in 1880, a golden-haired girl who had inherited her mother's serene beauty, and Carlos Manuel in 1882, a robust boy who promised to be as tall as his father. The 1883 wedding ceremony was also an occasion to fulfill promises accumulated over the years. Antonio announced the creation of a perpetual fund for the chapel's maintenance, guaranteeing it would always remain open to faithful who came from afar on pilgrimage. Mother Rosa, whose prayers had been fundamental for Manuel Antonio's healthy birth, received a larger house and property title that guaranteed sustenance for the rest of her life. She had become a legendary figure in the region, sought by pregnant women from distant plantations. Giuseppe was promoted to junior partner of the plantation, recognition for his loyalty and competence that had transformed São Bento plantation into one of the Paraíba Valley's most prosperous. His expertise in European agricultural techniques, combined with local knowledge, had resulted in record harvests year after year. Caterina, now 72, had become the honorary grandmother of all the plantation's children. Though no longer doing the kitchen's heavy work, she supervised special sweets preparation and told stories that mixed reality and fantasy in enchanting ways. During the celebration that followed the wedding, held in the plantation's main yard under autumn's starry sky, Antonio asked for silence for a special address. "Friends, 7 years ago, a brave woman invaded an abandoned cottage on my property. She thought she was merely seeking shelter for her children. She didn't know she was bringing new life to a house that had forgotten how to be happy." Francisca blushed, but smiled tenderly upon hearing those words. "Today," Antonio continued, "I can say I was the most blessed man in this region. I gained a wife who is an example of dignity, faith, and courage. I gained children who fill my life with joy. I gained a family that is my greatest wealth." He paused, his eyes shining with genuine emotion. "But above all, I learned that true love overcomes any obstacle. It overcomes social differences, legal complications, society's prejudices. When two people truly love each other, when they build their union on solid foundations of respect and faith, no storm can destroy what they've built. Applause echoed through the yard, mixed with tears from guests who had accompanied this extraordinary family's entire journey. Later, when the celebration ended and the children went to sleep, Antonio and Francisca walked to the chapel for a prayer of thanksgiving. It was their tradition to end all important days with a visit to the Blessed Sacrament. They knelt side by side in the front pew, hands intertwined, and prayed for all graces granted. The chapel, illuminated by dozens of votive candles, breathed serenity and accumulated faith. "Our Lady of Aparecida," Francisca murmured, "thank you for all graces granted, for the love I didn't dare hope for the family I didn't dare dream of, for the life we built together. And thank you," Antonio added, "for teaching us that invasions can become blessings, that misencounters can become definitive meetings, that true love is always victorious." When they left the chapel, the sky was constellated with stars that seemed like diamonds on dark velvet. San Bento plantation slept peacefully, blessed by the peace that comes from true love and sincere faith. Francisca, now definitively Donna Francisca Almeida Vasconcelos, looked around with profound gratitude. From that abandoned cottage, where she had begun as an invader to the position of respected matriarch, she had traveled a path that only divine providence could have traced. "It was a beautiful journey," she said, resting her head on Antonio's shoulder. "And it's not over yet," he replied, softly kissing her hair. "We have children to raise, grandchildren to meet, an entire lifetime of love to share." They walked back to the big house, where 5 children slept peacefully under the protection of love that had conquered all obstacles. Inside, the image of Our Lady of Aparecida watched over the family she herself had formed through mysterious and wonderful ways. The invader had become the mistress. Love had triumphed over all prejudices, and faith had revealed itself capable of working miracles that transcended human comprehension. This is the story of how Our Lady of Aparecida transformed a desperate invasion into the truest love the Paraíba Valley had ever witnessed, a story that would be told for generations, inspiring other hearts to believe that true love, guided by sincere faith, always finds its way home.